The sound of tires rolling over dry earth marked the arrival of a luxury pickup truck at the entrance of a secluded farm, surrounded by green fields, stables, and clean, open air. It was the kind of place where time seemed to move slower, and where the wounds of the past still whispered through the wind. Tobías Valverde stepped out of the vehicle with elegance. He wore designer work clothes, spotless boots, and a watch worth more than the truck itself. He was the youngest and most influential face in the agro-industrial sector, owner of a chain of agricultural supply stores spreading like wildfire across the country, a man everyone respected and feared. But that day, he wasn't arriving as a businessman. Something else had brought him back to that place. As he adjusted his hat and observed the landscape, a barely noticeable expression crossed his face. Here, years ago, he had loved like never before, and run away, as always. Inside the stable, a woman gently stroked the neck of a chestnut horse. Her hands, hardened by labor, contrasted with the tenderness with which she handled each animal. María Esteban hadn't changed much, although her eyes reflected a life lived with effort and sacrifice. Her ailing parents depended on her, and her entire world revolved around that farm, the horses, and those lonely sunrises. A distant whistle made the horse snort and turn its head. Maria looked up, and she saw him. There was Tobías. The air seemed to grow heavier the moment their eyes met. She froze, as if a ghost from the past had taken shape before her. He, on his part, tried to keep his composure, though his chest tightened at the sight of her. Maria frowned, saying nothing. She simply returned to her work as if he didn't exist. Tobías walked toward her with firm but cautious steps. Facing your mistakes is never easy, especially when those mistakes have a name, a face, and still hurt. He stopped at a respectful distance and watched as she avoided looking at him. The silence was as heavy as the past they shared. "Maria," he finally said, using the softest voice he had in years, "I didn't imagine I'd find you here." She didn't even turn around. She simply replied coldly while cleaning the horse's hoof, "I imagined I would never see you again." It felt like an invisible slap, but he accepted it. He deserved it. Several seconds of discomfort passed. Then Tobías took a step back, not pushing any further. "I'm just passing through. Business with the owner. I didn't mean to disturb you." Maria finally looked at him, her eyes locking onto his with a mix of rage, pain, and undiminished pride. "Don't worry. You're not disturbing anyone. You just don't matter anymore." And with that, she returned to the stable, leaving Tobías with a sting in his chest that not even all his money could soothe. But what neither of them knew was that this reunion was no coincidence. Fate, ever capricious, was setting something in motion. Because sometimes the past doesn't close until it's faced. The day went on with the usual countryside heat and the back and forth of activity between the stables and the ranch office. Tobías spent most of his time meeting with the owner, reviewing contracts, evaluating investment opportunities. On the outside, he looked like the same businessman as always, confident, decisive, relentless. But inside, he couldn't shake the image of Maria from his mind. It wasn't just guilt. It was something deeper, something that had been buried for years. And now, seeing her again, burned like a flame that had never fully gone out. Maria, on her part, tried to stay busy. She walked briskly between the corrals, checked every animal, gave orders to the staff as if nothing had happened. But her heart pounded every time she saw him from afar. She hated that he still affected her, hated that after everything she had been through, one look from Tobías could still stir up so much. At dusk, an unexpected commotion broke the day's calm. One of the younger horses, a wild colt that hadn't yet been fully trained, had escaped from its pen. It ran wild across the fields, startled by the metallic noise of machinery that had spooked it. Maria rushed out as soon as she heard the shouting. She grabbed a rope, mounted a nearby mare, and rode after the colt, determined to calm the animal before it hurt itself. Tobías saw her gallop past, her hair tied hastily in a bun, her eyes focused, her expression fierce. He didn't think twice. He dropped everything and followed her. The colt was heading toward a dangerous area near the cliff that bordered the back of the property. The terrain was unstable, with loose rocks and broken fences. Maria managed to catch up, but just as she tried to circle around to calm the horse, her mount tripped over a root hidden in the grass. Maria was thrown hard to the ground, just a few meters from the edge of the ravine. Tobías arrived at that exact moment. Without hesitation, he jumped off his horse and ran to her. The colt, still agitated, was charging straight toward her. Maria tried to sit up, but her ankle wouldn't respond. The wild look in the horse's eyes made it clear. It could strike her at any moment. Tobías threw himself over her, shielding her with his body, and at the last second made a motion that startled the colt enough to change its path. The animal ran off without hurting them. The silence that followed was deafening. Tobías remained over her, breathing heavily. Their eyes met, closer than they had been since that painful goodbye years ago. Maria didn't know what to say. Her heart was pounding. Not from the scare, not just from that. Still catching his breath, Tobías whispered, "I couldn't let anything happen to you." She swallowed hard, her gaze locked on his. "Why? Do you care now?" He didn't answer. He just looked at her, and in that look, for the first time, there was no arrogance, no pride, only sincerity, and maybe fear. Carefully, he helped her to her feet. She limped a little, but it wasn't serious. Even so, she accepted the arm he offered to lean on. They walked back to the stable in silence. The sun was setting, bathing everything in gold, a beautiful sunset, like the ones they used to share when they still believed love could conquer everything. But now, things were different, and although Maria's body was safe, her heart had begun to tremble again. Night fell over the farm with a heavy silence. In the stables, only the whispers of the horses remained, the creaking of the wood, and the distant chirping of crickets that seemed to tell old stories. Maria sat on a wooden bench, her ankle bandaged, a cup of tea in her hands. The warmth of the tea wasn't enough to melt the cold she felt inside. In front of her, emptiness, a space she used to fill with thoughts about the future, but that now overflowed with unanswered questions. She remembered the weight of Tobías's body over hers, the exact moment he threw himself to protect her. It was instinct, of course, but also something more, something she didn't want to admit. She gently touched her ankle. It hurt, yes, but not as much as the knot in her chest. Tobías, meanwhile, walked alone near the corrals. The stable's dim lights barely outlined his silhouette. He had spoken with the farm owner, closed the deal, done everything a good businessman should do. But he didn't feel like a successful man. He felt like someone who had arrived too late, far too late. The image of Maria on the ground, hurt, vulnerable, kept echoing a truth he had tried to ignore for years. He had never forgotten her. On impulse, he gathered the courage and walked toward where she was. His steps were steady, but his heart wasn't. Maria saw him coming from afar, and even though everything inside her told her to get up and leave, she didn't. Tobías stopped a few meters away. "May I sit?" She looked at him in silence for a few seconds, and then nodded. He sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance. So close, and yet so far. "Thank you for today," she said at last, breaking the silence. "You didn't have to do that." Tobías glanced at her. "I absolutely did. I wouldn't have forgiven myself if something had happened to you." She sighed, not looking at him. "It's been many years, Tobías. I don't understand why you're acting as if you still care." "Because I do care," he replied without hesitation, "and I never stopped caring." Maria let out a quiet, joyless laugh. "You chose to forget me. You left. No letter, no phone call, nothing." Tobías lowered his gaze. "I wrote to you many times, but my father, he made sure you never heard from me." Maria frowned, surprised. "Your father, he had plans for me. He thought being with you would derail my future. He controlled my mail, my accounts, my life. I was young, weak. I let myself be swept away." Maria gripped the cup tighter. Her world trembled. "Are you saying that you never left me of your own will?" Tobías nodded slowly. "I wanted to come back. many times. But when I finally had the courage, you were gone. I looked for you but couldn't find you, and I didn't know how to return." She stayed silent. She didn't know whether to believe him. Part of her wanted to hug him, cry, forgive, but another part still couldn't let go of the pain. "I need time," she said, her voice trembling. "I'll give it to you," he replied. "I didn't come to force anything. I just wanted you to know the truth. And if after that you still don't want me around, I'll understand." Maria nodded in silence. The air between them filled with words left unsaid, with restrained gestures, with memories beginning to stir. And even though neither of them knew it, that night marked the beginning of something new, something that maybe deserved a second chance. The next morning arrived with a gentle mist covering the fields like a silent blanket. The crowing of roosters broke the dawn, and the scent of fresh hay mixed with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee in the farmhouse kitchen. Maria woke with her ankle still sore, but her mind wasn't on the physical pain. She couldn't stop replaying what Tobías had told her the night before. His father, the letters, the search. What if it was true? What if all this time she had hated a man who had also suffered? But she couldn't let one conversation undo everything she had built to protect herself. She had learned to live without him, and her heart, though still sensitive, was no longer as naive as before. Meanwhile, Tobías had been at the stable since early morning, dressed in simple clothes, without his usual airs of a millionaire. He was helping clean, lifting hay bales, feeding the animals. At first, clumsy but sincere. He didn't do it out of pride. He did it for her. The workers watched him with curiosity. Some chuckled softly at the sight of him tripping or getting dirty, but he paid them no mind. His eyes searched only for Maria. Hours later she appeared, limping slightly, a folder in her hand and a furrow in her brow. "You don't have to do this," she said bluntly. "You don't need to pretend you belong here." Tobías stopped sweeping the stable aisle and looked at her calmly. "I'm not pretending. I'm learning. I want to understand what I left behind and what I want to get back." She studied him, searching for a crack, a sign that it was all a performance. But she found none. "This doesn't change anything, Tobías. Getting your hands dirty for a couple of days doesn't erase the past." "I know. I'm not trying to erase anything. I just want you to be able to look at me and not feel resentment." Maria lowered her gaze, uncomfortable with the honesty in his words. "Don't get it twisted," she said coldly. "I don't feel resentment. I just learned to live without you. That's all. And you, watching this story, what would you do if you were in Maria's place? Do you think it's possible to trust someone again after they've hurt you? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapters. Tobías took a cautious step toward her. "And now, could you learn to live with me again?" The silence was overwhelming. The horses breathed slowly. Outside, the wind gently rustled the leaves. Maria lifted her gaze, steady. "I'm not the same girl you once knew. I've changed. I have responsibilities, a real life, and you're still that man who can have everything, except what he lost." Her words hurt more than she wanted to admit. Tobías nodded, not arguing with her response. Then, in a calm voice, he said, "Then I'll start from zero, as if I'd never met you. But this time, I'm going to do it right." And without another word, he returned to his work, pushing a wheelbarrow full of hay, under Maria's silent gaze, who, for the first time, wasn't sure whether she wanted him to leave or stay forever. The days began to pass in an unexpectedly calm routine. Tobías remained at the farm with no intention of leaving. Although his original stay had been planned for just a day or two of business, he never mentioned going back, and no one dared to ask why he was still there. Maria watched him from a distance. At first with suspicion, then with a curiosity she didn't want to admit. Every morning he was there before anyone else, helping however he could, fixing fences, cleaning stalls, learning to use tools he had never touched before. He didn't complain, didn't seek attention. He just worked and waited. One afternoon, while Maria was checking on a feverish foal, Her father, Don Rafael, came out onto the porch in his wheelchair. Illness had weakened him over the years, but his gaze was still sharp. "That young man, Tobías, he's not like I remembered," he said suddenly. Maria turned slowly, surprised by the comment. "What do you mean?" "Back then, he had the arrogance of someone who thinks he can buy everything. Now, he seems more human, almost like he's looking for redemption." Maria didn't answer. She continued taking the foal's temperature, though her mind had drifted far away. "And you?" her father asked gently. "Do you still look at him like he broke your heart?" She froze. It was the first time anyone had said it out loud. "Dad, that was many years ago. Old wounds take the longest to heal, daughter. And you? Never let anyone else come close." She stood slowly, running her hand down the foal's back. She didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to admit that maybe something inside her still trembled when she saw him. That night, while she adjusted the bandages on the foal, Tobías appeared quietly and knelt to help. He no longer asked for permission. He simply approached with respect, like someone who knew that every small gesture mattered. "How is he?" he asked, holding the bottle of medicine. "Better," she replied, "but he needs watching. He could worsen overnight." "Then I'll stay with you." Maria looked at him surprised. "There's no need. I'm used to watching over sick horses." "I'm not doing it for the horse," he said without looking away. "I'm doing it for you." Silence settled between them again, but this time it was different. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was warm, as if something invisible had begun to rebuild. They spent hours sitting in the stable, not saying much, watching the animal breathe, exchanging occasional glances, sharing a blanket someone had quietly left for them. Maria, without realizing it, gently rested her head on Tobías's shoulder, just for a moment, just enough to remember what it felt like to trust. And although neither of them said it that night, both knew something had changed. Maybe forgiveness wasn't a destination, maybe it was a path, and they had just taken the first step. The first rays of sunlight spilled over the fields as Tobías awoke, still sitting on the hay beside the stable. Maria was already up, organizing some tools, her hair tied in a messy bun and her eyes tired, but calm. The colt had made it through the night, and although both of them knew he wasn't completely out of danger, there was relief in their movements. It was the first time in a long while that they shared a silence that didn't hurt. "I'll stay with him a few more hours," Maria said, without looking at him. "You can go get some rest." "I don't mind staying," Tobías replied, standing up slowly and stretching his shoulders. "But if you're kicking me out, I'll obey." She gave a brief smile, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Later that morning, with the sun high in the sky, Tobías was called to an impromptu meeting with the owner of the farm. But when he arrived at the main porch, he was met with something unexpected. A man in a dark suit, arrogant posture, and a forced smile was waiting with a folder in hand. Beside him stood the farm owner wearing a concerned expression. "Valverde. What a coincidence," the man said, extending his hand. "I didn't expect to find you here." "Dante Muñoz," Tobías replied, shaking his hand firmly, without warmth. Dante was a well-known businessman in the sector, infamous for shady practices. He had a reputation for buying up small properties with generous promises, only to exploit them to the bone and then leave them abandoned. "I'm evaluating this farm for a possible acquisition," Dante said casually. "Seems we have a shared interest." Tobías kept a neutral expression, but something inside him sparked a warning. "This land is valuable, but I'm not sure it's for sale," he answered, casting a subtle glance at the owner. The older man cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "The truth is, the farm is in debt, Tobías. Last year's harvest failed and the bills are piling up. I'm considering offers." At that moment, Maria stepped outside carrying a bucket of feed. She stopped when she saw Dante, and her expression hardened. "You again?" she said, not hiding her disdain. "Maria, always a pleasure," Dante replied with a cynical smile. "Still as feisty as ever." Tobías frowned. "You two know each other?" Maria nodded. "He tried to buy my uncle's farm 2 years ago. Made promises but left them with debt and barren land. They had to start over from nothing." Dante pretended not to be fazed. Business, darling. Not everyone knows how to play the game. Tobías stepped forward. Well then, this farm isn't for sale, at least not to you. Dante raised an eyebrow. Are you sure about that, Valverde? Because if you're willing to go to war over this, I hope you're ready. I don't usually lose. The silence that followed was tense, but Tobías simply crossed his arms and looked him in the eye. We'll see. Dante left shortly after, leaving a cloud of uncertainty in his wake. María walked over, her eyes still filled with anger. You're going to buy the farm just to protect me. Tobías took a deep breath. No, I want to protect this place. And you. But I don't intend to do it without your permission. María hesitated. Inside, she was torn. He was acting like a different man, someone she could almost start to trust again. But there was still so much she didn't know, so many wounds left unhealed. I just don't want you to make the same mistakes again, she whispered, before walking away. Tobías stayed there, staring out at the horizon. This time, he wouldn't let anything, not time, not secrets, not Dante, destroy what he was trying to rebuild. With her, for her. That week, something began to change, almost imperceptibly, like the sky lightening before dawn. It wasn't words, it wasn't promises. It was small gestures, lingering glances, silences that no longer felt heavy. Tobías began visiting the main house on the farm more frequently, always bringing something simple, fresh fruit, medicine for Maria's parents, new tools for the stable, never with ostentation, always with respect. That's how he got to know Maria's mother better, Doña Clara, a gentle woman with a soft voice who spent her days sewing and looking out the window with a kind of quiet hope. You came back for her, didn't you? Doña Clara asked one afternoon while sewing an old quilt. Tobías smiled as he pulled a chair closer to her. I never should have left. Is there still time? I hope so, but I'm not here to force anything. I just want to be worthy of being near her. Doña Clara looked at him for a moment, as if weighing him with her heart. Then she returned to her stitching and murmured, Then be patient. María is like those horses you love so much. She's known pain, and because of that, she even doubts kindness. That night, María found her mother smiling while chatting with Tobías. The two of them were laughing at some old story from his youth, something about how he fell off a horse trying to impress her. The scene surprised her. There was a tenderness there she hadn't expected to see again. Later, alone with her mother, María asked, Did he say anything about me? Doña Clara just smiled, serene. He didn't need to. The way he looks at you says everything. But the real question is, do you still look at him the way you used to? María didn't answer, because the answer scared her. The next morning, something strange happened. One of the farm workers, Pedro, found tire tracks near the back fence where there usually wasn't any movement. In addition, some tools had gone missing from the shed. This wasn't just a random theft, Pedro said. Someone was scouting the area. Tobías listened carefully and stayed silent for a few seconds. Dante, he said firmly. He's trying to intimidate, create instability. It's how he operates. Maria's lips tightened at the mention of the name. He's not going to stop, is he? Not until he gets what he wants, Tobías replied. And what does he want? The farm, or to tear us apart? Tobías looked at her, serious. Maybe both. A chill ran down her spine, but she didn't look away. Then we have to protect this, the farm, and everything that still has a chance to grow here. For the first time, she spoke of a we. And in that moment between fear and hope, Tobías understood. Her heart was still wounded, but she no longer kept it locked away. What lay ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in years, they were on the same side. The following days were marked by a quiet unease. The farm workers began murmuring about strange noises at night, broken fences and missing tools. Small signs, but constant. Something was being orchestrated in the shadows, and everyone knew exactly who was behind it. Dante Muñoz was not a man who gave up easily. That morning, the farm owner called Tobías and María into his office for an urgent meeting. I received a legal notice, he said, his face tense. Dante is contesting an old supply contract, claiming we owe him money, Now he's trying to place a lien on part of the land as collateral. Tobías clenched his fists. He's exploiting legal loopholes to force a sale. This is more serious than I thought. María stood up suddenly. He wants to scare us, to weaken us from the inside before making his final move. And it's working, the owner replied. If we don't find a quick solution, I could lose part of the farm. Tobías was silent for a moment, then stepped toward the desk. I have a proposal. I can buy part of the land under my company's name, legally. That way we block any of Dante's tactics. But you need to trust me. María looked at him, surprised. There was firmness in his voice, but also something new, something she wasn't sure she was ready to accept. That would put us in your hands, she said, hesitant. This isn't about control, Tobías replied, looking her directly in the eyes. It's about protection. I don't want to take anything from you. I want to make sure no one else does. The farm owner nodded slowly, considering, but María remained tense. After all, trusting Tobías meant far more than signing papers. That afternoon, she went out alone into the fields, trying to find peace among the horses. She sat beneath the shade of a tree, watching the horizon, when she heard footsteps behind her. I know you have every reason to doubt me, Tobías said softly. I lied, I ran, I left you alone. But if I'm here today, it's because I still believe in what we once had. María turned slowly to face him. And what if that no longer exists? Tobías stepped closer without rushing. Then I'll be content to protect what you love, even if that doesn't include me. Something cracked inside her. The anger, the pride, the pain. It all began to melt in the presence of a man who demanded nothing, but offered everything. She stood, slowly, and faced him. I don't know if I can love you again, but I do know I don't want to lose you one more time. Tobías nodded, his eyes misty. Then let me stay. That's all I ask. She didn't answer with words. She simply placed her hand over his, for the first time, without fear. But on the other side of the fence, hidden among the trees, someone was watching. Dante. His plan was just beginning, and now it wasn't just about land. He wanted to destroy what Tobías most wanted to rebuild. María's love. Night fell hard over the farm. The wind blew stronger than usual, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else, something uneasy, as if the land itself sensed that something was about to happen. Tobías couldn't sleep. He was poring over the farm's financial records, evaluating strategies to stop Dante from advancing legally. His phone buzzed with alerts, and fatigue began to weigh on him. But something inside wouldn't let him stop. Meanwhile, María was returning from the stable, where she'd stayed late taking care of a pregnant mare. As she neared the house, she noticed a thin column of smoke rising from the tool shed. She ran. The flames were still small, but quickly spreading through the dry hay bales stacked inside. She shouted for help. Workers came running with buckets of water and fire extinguishers. Tobías arrived seconds later, grabbed a hose, and rushed into the shed with a courage that made María's heart skip a beat. After several tense minutes, they managed to contain the fire. The farm owner, panting, looked around. This wasn't an accident. On the ground near the door was an empty gasoline can and fresh footprints. Tobías stepped closer to María. He's trying to provoke a disaster, to weaken us. So you'll give up. He knows me, she replied, breathing heavily, her voice full of fury. And he knows I don't run. Tobías felt a quiet pride as he looked at her. Strong, determined, relentless. The same as before, only now more of a woman. In the days that followed, security measures were tightened. The workers organized night shifts. Tobías hired discreet surveillance. And in secret, he began investigating Dante's latest legal moves. Despite the tension, their time together began to feel more natural. María no longer avoided him. On the contrary, she welcomed his acts of care. A cup of coffee left in the stable, a coat offered on a chilly morning, a shared silence during walks through the fields. One afternoon, after visiting the local veterinarian, María returned with a tired look. The pregnant mare was at risk. She could lose the foal at any moment. Tobías saw her walk in, and without saying a word, made her a cup of tea and handed it to her silently. She accepted it, and for the first time, she let herself sink beside him on the rustic porch sofa. "Sometimes I wish I didn't care so much," she whispered. "That's what makes you unique," he replied, looking out over the fields. "You feel everything, even when you try to hide it." Maria looked at him. Her eyes were red from exhaustion, but also from emotion. "And you? Do you still feel?" Tobías slowly turned to her, locking eyes. "I never stopped." For a moment, time stopped. No promises, no declarations, just a look, deep, honest, alive. And then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, Maria slowly leaned in and rested her head on his shoulder. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath. Tobías didn't move. He simply remained there, like a silent rock, holding the weight of her pain. And maybe, little by little, her heart too. Outside, the sky was beginning to change color. A storm was coming, but on the porch, there was a peace that not even fear could erase. The storm arrived that night, like a warning from fate. Lightning tore through the sky, and thunder made the window panes tremble. But inside the farmhouse, everything remained still. Maria couldn't sleep. Her head on the pillow was a stage of restless thoughts. Tobías's constant presence, the tenderness of the previous night, the silent warmth of that shoulder that supported her without asking for anything in return, all of it left her confused. To clear her mind, she decided to organize the farm's archive room, a small space packed with boxes, old documents, forgotten contracts, and unlabeled folders. As she shuffled through the papers, trying to distract herself, an aged envelope fell from the back of a drawer. It had her father's name written by hand, Rafael Esteban, and below it, another name, Adolfo Valverde, Tobías's father. Maria's heart raced. She opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a supply contract dated nearly 20 years ago, signed by her father and Tobías's father. But something was off. In the bottom margin, a clause in tiny letters mentioned the temporary transfer of part of the land as collateral for an agreement that, according to the records, was never completed. Stranger still, the contract was altered, and beside it was a handwritten note, almost like a confession. "I never wanted to involve you in this, Rafael, but my son will never know what I did to protect him. This dirty debt will be my burden." Maria let the paper fall into her lap. This changed everything. Tobías's father had used her father's name to cover up a shady transaction, and that explained why the farm was now being legally challenged. Dante had somehow gotten access to that contract, and now he was using it against them. The sound of footsteps behind her snapped her out of her shock. Tobías stood at the door, his face filled with concern. "Are you okay?" "I saw the light on." Maria turned slowly, holding the papers in her hands. "Your father used my father's name. He made a dirty contract to cover a debt, and now Dante is using it against us." Tobías stepped closer, took the document and read it with a furrowed brow. His eyes widened as he recognized his father's handwriting. "I had no idea," he said, lowering the paper. "He hid this from me too." "Of course he did, because in the end, he was the one who started all of this." Maria stood, her eyes shining with anger. "My father was accused of being incompetent for years. We thought we had made bad business decisions. We lost crops, we cut costs, and all of it because of a lie signed by your father." Tobías didn't know what to say. The pain in Maria's eyes was deep, not directed at him, but at the memory of everything her family had suffered in silence. "If I had known, I would have told you. I swear, Maria, but I was as manipulated as you were. The difference is you had a choice. My father didn't." Those words hit hard. She took a step back. "I need time, alone." And she left, leaving Tobías standing in the middle of the room, holding the contract as if it were a sentence. For the first time since he returned, he didn't know if there was still time to fix the past, or if it was already too late. In the days that followed, Maria sank into silence. She continued working, tending to the animals, managing the farm as always, but her gaze was distant. She no longer shared laughs with her mother, nor sought Tobías's presence as she once had. The brief touch of his hand, the shoulder where she had rested her head, all now seemed like a recent past she was trying to forget. Tobías noticed every detail, every averted glance, every word spoken with disguised coldness, and above all, he noticed the weight she carried on her shoulders, like she was once again alone against the world. On the porch, Doña Clara served tea while watching the two of them in silence. One afternoon, she pulled Tobías aside. "You're losing her again, boy." Tobías lowered his eyes, gripping the teacup tightly. "This time it wasn't my fault. It was my father's. But you're the one who'll pay the price. And if you really want to be with her, you'll have to prove it with actions, not excuses." That night, Tobías stayed up for hours. He read and reread the documents, his father's name there, printed in cold letters, like a shadow still controlling his steps. That's when he made a decision. The next day, he drove into town and scheduled a meeting with his lawyer and the local press, a respected rural newspaper known for investigating land disputes. He told no one. Hours later, María and the farm owner were stunned by a headline spreading quickly among the workers' phones. Heir to the Valverde agribusiness empire denounces father's fraud and admits debt to small rural farm. I want to clear the true owner's name. The article detailed the manipulated contract, the handwritten confession from Adolfo Valverde, and Tobías's decision to relinquish part of his shares in the company in exchange for the definitive cancellation of the legal claim against the farm. María ran to confront him. She found him in the stable, as always, sleeves rolled up, feeding one of the colts. "You went to the press?" Tobías turned slowly, his expression calm. "They needed to hear the truth. Everyone did. You put your family's name on the line. I put my truth on the line. And that truth includes you, and this land, and everything my father tried to destroy." María shook her head, confused, emotional, angry, and grateful, all at once. "You're going to lose power, respect, maybe even your company." "I don't care. I already lost you once for not fighting. I'm not making that mistake again." She remained silent. The wind moved through her hair, and for a moment time seemed to stand still, as if the universe were waiting to hear what she would say next. "You did this. For me." Tobías stepped forward, eyes misty but steady. "I did this for us. Even if you never forgive me. Even if you decide to move on alone. I just needed to give you back what was always yours. The truth, your dignity, and the choice." María took a deep breath. "I'm still hurt. I know. But for the first time, I'm no longer alone in this pain." Tobías extended his hand. María hesitated for a moment, and then took it. It was a light touch, but full of meaning, a bridge between two worlds that once seemed irreconcilable. And though the past was still there, like a distant echo, the present had begun to whisper something new, something that sounded like hope. The news spread like wildfire. The press, competitors, investors, everyone wanted to know why Tobías Valverde, one of the most promising men in the agro-industrial world, had chosen to expose his father's wrongdoing and risk his reputation and his business. But on the farm, where time moved differently, the only thing that mattered was that María now knew the truth, and more than that he had chosen the right side, even if it cost him everything. That morning, María looked at herself in the mirror with a new kind of calm. There was sadness in her eyes, yes, but also strength. She was tired of being the one who took the hits. Now she wanted to take action. She put on her simplest jacket, tied her hair back, and held in her hands a folder of documents, copies, evidence, proof. She drove into town alone. Tobías had offered to go with her, but she refused. "This part I need to do on my own." Arriving at Dante Muñoz's office, she walked in without an appointment. The space, modern and cold, smelled of power and expensive cologne. Dante, always with his cynical smile, greeted her with false courtesy. "María Esteban, what a pleasant surprise. "Spare me your cheap charm, Dante," she replied, tossing the folder onto his desk. "Here are the documents proving the fraud committed by Tobías's father, your attempt to profit from it, and his official statement waiving any claim to the land." Dante raised an eyebrow but kept the smile. "So Valverde really did it. He's weaker than I thought." "No, Dante, he's stronger than you'll ever be, because to admit a mistake and make it right takes courage, and you honestly have never had that." Dante stood, his expression hardening. "You don't know who you're dealing with." "Oh, I do. A small man who hides behind contracts and bullies others because he's never had anything real to lose." She turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Last warning, if you come near the farm again, this land or the people who live there, I will personally make sure your fall is public and painful." She walked out without looking back. For the first time in her life, Maria didn't feel fear. She felt control. She felt her voice echo with certainty. Upon returning to the farm, she found Tobías on the porch, talking with Doña Clara. He stood when he saw her and walked toward her, anxious. "How did it go?" Maria took a deep breath. "He won't be bothering us anymore." Tobías looked at her with genuine admiration, not as a man who wants to protect, but as someone who knows he is standing before a woman who protects herself. "You faced Dante." "I did, like you taught me, not to run from what hurts." He smiled, his eyes filled with tenderness. "And now," Maria looked around, the farm, the fields, the horses, everything was still there, but something in her heart still needed time. "Now, I need to find my own peace. Before I know if I can share it with someone." Tobías nodded, understanding every word. He wanted to be with her, yes, but more than that, he wanted her to be free. "If one day that peace leads you to me, I'll be here. If not, I'll still be proud of who you are." Maria touched his hand gently and looked into his eyes. "You're no longer the man who left, and I am no longer the girl who stayed behind." They looked at each other for a long moment. Nothing else was said. Nothing needed to be. What they had now was truth, and where there is truth, there is room for love, even if it still needs time to grow. The weeks that followed were unlike anything they had experienced before. Tobías returned to the city to face the repercussions of his public statement. The company's board of directors welcomed him with distrust. Some investors threatened to pull out, and rumors spread quickly throughout the agro-industrial sector. But for the first time, Tobías didn't run from discomfort. He sat before the board and spoke with conviction. "I can't build anything on silence, and if that means I have to start over from scratch, then so be it." There was debate, questions, but also respect. Many in that room silently admired the gesture. They weren't used to seeing men who sacrificed power for integrity. Meanwhile, back on the farm, Maria received an unexpected proposal. A rural university in the region invited her to take part in a veterinary outreach project, bringing care and assistance to small, at-risk properties. A recognition of her skill, her story, her strength. She hesitated to accept. It was a new step. Away from the farm, more exposure, more responsibility. She spoke with her parents, who encouraged her. "You spent years taking care of us," said Doña Clara. "Now it's time to take care of yourself too." Maria smiled. For the first time, she thought about herself without guilt. She and Tobías exchanged brief messages. Nothing intense, nothing forced, just what was needed, and enough. A sincere good morning, a photo of the field at sunset, and "I'm thinking of you," shy but full of meaning. One night, after returning to the farm from a university meeting, Maria received an envelope. It was from Tobías. Inside was a letter, handwritten. "Maria, returning to the city felt strange. Everything looks the same, but inside me, nothing is as it was. I'm relearning what it means to be a man, a leader, a son, and maybe, with luck, someone who might one day deserve your love again. I know I can't rush your time, and I don't want to. I just wanted you to know that wherever you are, my soul walks beside yours. T." Maria read the letter more than once. She cried in silence, not out of sadness, but because she felt that finally her heart was being treated with the gentleness it deserved. She took a sheet of paper and wrote back, "Tobías, you've changed, and that has changed me too. Today, I don't know if we're ready to start over together, but I know I want to keep meeting you at the curve in the road. And if we're going to walk side by side, let it be with steady steps, clear eyes, and truth. M." The next day, he received the letter, and he smiled. Because sometimes love doesn't need promises. It only needs truth, patience, and time. And theirs was just beginning. The nearby town was preparing for its annual agricultural fair. It was the biggest event in the region. Farmers, horse breeders, entire families and young entrepreneurs gathered to exchange knowledge, showcase innovations and, of course, display their best animals. Maria had been invited by the university to represent the rural veterinary project. Her mission was simple: explain the initiative's benefits and attract new partnerships. But for her, being there meant something deeper. It was stepping out of the past's shadow and walking confidently into the present. She wore a light blouse, worn jeans and simple boots, her hair loose in the breeze, a name badge hanging from her neck and a clipboard in hand. Her smile came easily, but her heart was still divided. "Are you Maria Esteban?" asked a well-dressed man passing by the booth. "I am," she replied kindly. "I've heard great things about the project. They say it's innovative and already making a difference." Maria smiled, grateful, but before she could respond, another sound cut through the air. The rhythmic trot of horses in the exhibition area, and with it, a sight that made her catch her breath. Tobías, riding one of the new rural-bred horses his company was sponsoring. Simple, elegant, completely at ease in the environment. His eyes searched the crowd until they found hers. He dismounted effortlessly, took off his hat, and walked toward the booth. Some people recognized him and whispered. Others simply watched with curiosity. But Maria saw no one else. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said, trying to stay composed. "I didn't expect to come either, but I heard a certain amazing veterinarian would be presenting something worth supporting." She crossed her arms, trying to mask her nervousness. "You're supporting the project?" "I am. One of the producers affiliated with my network decided to fund part of the initiative. I just gave it a little push." "You keep doing things without telling me," she said, though without reproach. "Because I don't do them to be seen. I do them because I believe in you, in what you're building." Maria lowered her eyes for a moment. She was still trying to protect herself, but something inside her was slowly melting. "Would you like to see the booth?" she asked quietly. "If you let me walk by your side, I'll go anywhere you want." They walked among the stalls, the sounds of the fair, mixing with the smell of roasted corn and fresh hay. The world around them seemed to fade. Tobías listened to Maria with genuine attention, and little by little she laughed more, gestured freely, relaxed. They stopped in front of a tent, housing a newborn foal, part of the region's genetic preservation program. "He's beautiful," Tobías said. "He's the first of many, just like our project." He looked at her for a moment. "And what about us?" Maria met his gaze, serious. "You know my heart is still learning to trust again, and I've learned to wait. But," he paused, "I need to tell you something, even if you're not ready to answer." She held her breath. "Tell me." Tobías looked at her with intensity. His voice came steady, unhurried. "I still love you, and now I love you better, with less urgency, with more truth." Maria stayed silent, a silence that didn't hurt, a silence full of life. Then she stepped closer and gently touched his arm. "I don't know if I'm ready to say the same, but I'm ready to stop pushing you away." And for the first time, they both smiled at the same time, a light smile full of understanding and full of promise. Because love doesn't always need to be declared in grand words. Sometimes it begins in the simplest gesture, staying. The days following the agricultural fair were as gentle as an evening breeze. María returned to the farm with a lighter soul. She was no longer just a veterinarian, she was now a reference, a field teacher, a bridge between ancient knowledge and modern solutions. Tobías, in turn, resumed his responsibilities at the company, now with a different posture, closer to people, less focused on numbers, more attentive to purpose. His relationship with investors was slowly being rebuilt, but he no longer made promises of aggressive growth. He made promises of ethics, transparency, and real impact. They both continued on their paths, but in parallel, always leaving room for one another. Their nightly phone calls became a quiet ritual, and little by little, intimacy returned, this time in a more mature, more honest form. But fate, as always, had other plans. On a grey afternoon, María was tending to an elderly mare in the stable when she heard a truck pull up outside. It wasn't unusual. Students, farmers, even journalists often visited. But as she stepped outside to greet the visitor, she felt the ground shift beneath her feet. A woman in her 50s stepped out of the car, elegant, discreet, with serious eyes, and the posture of someone who carried truths on her shoulders. María recognized her instantly. "You're Mrs. Carmen Valverde," she said, almost breathless. "Tobías's mother." The woman nodded. "We need to talk." In the silence of the kitchen, María made coffee with trembling hands. Mrs. Carmen watched everything quietly, until finally she spoke. "I heard what Tobías did, what he revealed, what he lost, for you. He didn't lose anything. He did the right thing," María replied firmly. The woman smiled softly. "He's always been intense, like his father, but he never had the courage to stand up to him, until now." María lowered her eyes. "Why did you come here?" Carmen placed a small wooden box on the table. Inside were letters, old, some yellowed, all addressed to María Esteban. "Tobías never knew, but I was the one who kept these letters. I didn't want you back in his life." María was silent, stunned. "His father was cruel, ambitious, but I was a coward. I saw how much you meant to Tobías, and I thought, by hiding these letters I was protecting him from becoming weak." María opened one of the letters, her heart clenched. His handwriting, the words she had waited for all those years, declarations, apologies, promises to return. Tears fell before she even noticed. "Why are you telling me this now?" Carmen sighed. "Because he's changed. He chose truth, even without knowing my part in it. And you're the only one who can give him what he's always searched for, a true home." María closed the box carefully, her chest tight, her mind racing. Just then, Tobías arrived at the farm, holding a surprise, flowers from the fair, ready for a simple gesture. But he froze when he saw his mother's car and Maria's tear-streaked face. "What's going on?" María looked at him. There was pain, but also relief. "Your mother just gave me back the past." He looked at Carmen, then at the box, and understood. He said nothing. Carmen stood, adjusting her purse. "Now, it's between the two of you." She left, leaving the house steeped in a heavy silence. María and Tobías looked at each other for a long moment. She held the box of letters as if it were a stitched-up heart. "You wrote to me for years, but I thought you didn't want anything to do with me anymore." She stepped closer. "I cried for every letter that never came." Tobías closed his eyes, overcome. "I would have done everything differently if I had known, but now we know," she whispered. He embraced her, tightly, like someone holding on to what was nearly lost forever, and in that embrace there was no more guilt, only reunion. The atmosphere on the farm felt lighter since the reunion between Tobías and María. After the revelation made by Carmen, Tobías's mother, the two had allowed themselves to live something new, still cautious, still carrying scars, but now with open hearts. They shared simple dinners on the porch, walks between the stables, and long conversations under the stars. There was no longer any doubt that what bound them wasn't just memory. It was something alive and strong. But peace never lasts forever. One Saturday morning, María received an unexpected call from the university. one of the professors involved in the rural project, had nominated her for a spot in an international program. If selected, she would spend a year in Spain, leading research on equine medicine and building partnerships with organizations dedicated to preserving local horse breeds. It was the dream of any veterinarian in her field. Maria was silent on the other end of the line. The coordinator's voice explained deadlines, possibilities, scholarships, but she barely listened because part of her screamed with excitement and another part froze. That same afternoon, while washing her hands by the sink beside the stable, she told Tobías. He listened in silence, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "It's the opportunity of a lifetime," he said finally. "I know, but," she hesitated, "it's also the moment when I finally started to feel like I belong. Here, with you." Tobías stepped closer, slowly. "You can't give this up for me. And you can't pretend you're not scared." He smiled, but there was sadness in his eyes. "I am scared, very. But my fear can't be greater than the love I feel for you." Maria swallowed hard. She had never expected to hear him say it so directly. No detours, no conditions. "And if I go," she whispered, "I'll wait. 1 year is nothing for someone who's lost so many. And if after all this you still want to come back, I'll be here. But if you find a new path, I'll still be proud of you." She hugged him tightly, her chest heavy, her heart divided. In the days that followed, she reflected alone. She walked through the fields, visited the horses she had helped save, reread the letters he had written years ago, looked at all she had rebuilt, and everything she might still build. And then, on a quiet afternoon, while the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, she sat beside him on the porch, no rush, no tension. "I'm going to accept the offer," she said, her eyes steady. Tobías took a deep breath and nodded. "You deserve it." She took his hand. "But I want to leave knowing I'm not running away. I'm going for me. And if what we have really is what it seems, it'll cross the ocean and come back even stronger." Tobías squeezed her hand, a sincere smile on his lips. "Love that traps isn't love, but the kind that follows even from afar. That's the one with real roots." And there, in that golden sunset, they sealed a silent pact, an agreement made not with empty promises, but with real trust. Because sometimes loving also means knowing how to let go, with the certainty that, if it's true, the road will lead back. Madrid, autumn. Trees tinged gold along the sidewalks, and the scent of old books drifting through the halls of a centuries-old university. Maria hurried through the corridors of the Institute of Veterinary Sciences, arms full of folders, drafts, and coffee. It had been 2 weeks since she arrived in Spain, and like everything in her life, it wasn't coming easily. The project demanded dedication, sleepless nights, interviews, meetings, and protocols. She loved what she did, but deep down, something was missing. Every day, at the same hour, she received a message. Sometimes a simple, "I saw you in a sunset today." Other times, a photo of the pregnant mare that had finally given birth, or of a cup of coffee in the very spot where they used to sit and talk on the farm. It was Tobías, always present, even from afar. Maria didn't always reply right away, but she read everything, saved everything, held on to those words like small embers to warm her when the cold set in. Meanwhile, in Brazil, Tobías immersed himself in the intense rhythm of restructuring. After the public exposure of his father's fraud, many investors had begun to trust more in his leadership, not because of strength, but because of values. At a lunch with the board, one of the new members made a bold suggestion. "You should consider running for public office, Tobías. You have vision, you have a voice, and you have people's respect. The agricultural sector needs leaders like you." He smiled politely, but inside, something stirred. Politics? It had never been his ambition. But what if now he could use his influence to protect more farms like Maria's, to support programs like the one she was leading, to do something bigger than just manage profits? That night, he couldn't sleep. He walked out to the porch of the house he now cared for personally. In his hands, the last letter Maria had left him before she left. He read it again, as he always did. If love can't survive time and distance, then it was never love. But if one day I return and you're still here, maybe finally we'll be two people who chose to stay despite everything." He picked up his phone, typed, "I thought of you today, of everything you're doing out there, and of how everything I'm doing here, somehow, is still for us." She replied just minutes later, "And I still find you in every horse I save, in every hard decision, in every silence filled with longing." It was the first time she wrote back with such tenderness. Tobías smiled. They still didn't know what the future held, but they knew the most important thing. They were moving forward, apart on the map, but side by side in soul. And sometimes that was all they needed. Winter was beginning to arrive in Spain. The days were shorter, the sky grayer, and the biting wind that swept through the old buildings made Maria pull her scarf tighter around her neck every morning. Despite the demanding routine and the professional fulfillment her project brought her, there were days when she felt empty, as if she had achieved everything except the presence of the one who truly mattered. On a particularly cold afternoon, Maria was visiting a small rural community south of Madrid, where the equine preservation project was about to begin a new phase. During an inspection of one of the stables, she felt a sudden dizziness. She leaned against the wooden wall, trying to breathe. "Está bien, doctora?" asked one of the assistants. Maria nodded, trying to brush it off. "Sí, solo fue un mareo," but it didn't pass. In the days that followed, she continued to feel strange, nausea, fatigue, unusual sensitivity. She decided to visit a doctor at the university just to rule out any concerns. And it was there, between tests and silence, that she received the news. She was pregnant. For a few seconds, everything stopped. She looked at the doctor, then at the floor, then out the window. The world kept spinning out there, but inside her, everything had changed. She returned home in silence, sat on the bed with her hands on her belly. A life, a new story, a piece of a love that she still didn't know would become home, but had already taken root. She picked up her phone, thought about calling, thought about writing, but she couldn't. Not yet. Not in that moment. Instead, she called Doña Clara. Her voice trembled as she told her, and when she finished, she heard only, "You are strong, my daughter, and this baby will be proof that when love is real, it leaves something behind." That night, Maria wrote a letter. She didn't know if she would ever send it, but she needed to put into words what her heart couldn't yet speak aloud. "Tobías, today I found out I'm no longer alone, and, strangely enough, it was in that moment I missed you the most. I don't know what our future holds. I don't know if you still dream of me the way you once did, but there is something new inside me, something of yours, something of ours, and maybe it's this life that will finally show us the way back." She placed the letter in the drawer. It wasn't time yet, but time was getting ready to move faster. It was a morning like any other on the farm. The sky was clear, the wind danced through the trees, and Tobías was riding across the fields, as he did almost every day since Maria had left. It was the only way he'd found to quiet the longing, riding through memories. On the porch, Doña Clara waited. She had received a letter from Maria that week, a letter that made her smile, and then cry in silence, but she knew that kind of news couldn't be kept. It had to reach the one who mattered most. When Tobías returned, sweaty, tired, and with a distant look in his eyes, she stood waiting with an envelope in hand. "It's from Maria," she said, holding it out. Tobías took it carefully. He recognized the handwriting instantly. He sat on the wooden bench, opened it with anxious fingers, and began to read. With each line, his breath grew shorter. His eyes welled up, and by the time he reached the final sentence, the letter fell into his lap. He couldn't speak. He simply brought his hand to his mouth, as though his heart no longer fit inside his chest. "She's pregnant," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "She's having a baby. Our baby." Doña Clara nodded gently. "She's still not sure if she's ready to see you, but she wrote because she felt you needed to know." Tobías stood up abruptly, walked over to the fence. The world seemed to spin differently now. Everything had new meaning. She's alone, on the other side of the ocean, and she's carrying a part of me. Clara watched him tenderly. And you? What are you going to do? Tobías was silent for a few seconds. Then he turned around, eyes full of purpose. I'm going to her. That same night he started organizing everything. Flight, documents, an emergency meeting at the company. He left everything in order, called the board, and said he needed time, not to run away, but to do what was right. Days later, he landed in Madrid with his heart racing. He knew the address, knew the city, but he didn't know if she would let him in. At sunset, with golden light glowing against the old buildings, he stood before the apartment building where María was living. He took a deep breath, climbed the steps slowly. Each one felt heavy and light all at once. He knocked on the door. She took a while to open. When she did, her hair was tied back, she wore a loose blouse, and her eyes widened in surprise. Her hand instinctively rested on her belly. Tobías looked at her, deeply, as one looks at a miracle they never expected to find. I came because I couldn't stay away any longer, he said, voice trembling, and not because of the baby, but for you, for us. She didn't say anything. She just opened the door a little wider and let him in. Inside that small apartment the silence was thick, but there was peace in their eyes, a truth in the air, and a love that, despite all the missed chances, still knew the way home. The door closed behind Tobías. The apartment was quiet, warm, filled with the gentle scent of tea and eucalyptus. He walked slowly, not too close. María was still watching him with cautious eyes, but there was tenderness in them. She sat down on the couch, gently, one hand resting on her now slightly rounded belly. He remained standing in front of her, hands clasped. At last he broke the silence. I didn't come to ask for anything. I didn't come to demand anything. I came because the moment I read your letter, I realized my life will never be complete without you by my side. And now this little someone is part of that too. She took a deep breath, caressed her belly softly. When I found out, I was scared. But at the same time, I felt peace. Because I never imagined something so pure could be born from the story we lived. And if you'll let me, he said, stepping a little closer, I want to live that story with you, for real. No distance, no guilt, no silence. María looked at him, her eyes glowing. You still have your company, your life, your whole world far from here. But my home is here, he interrupted, kneeling before her. Wherever you are, that's where I want to be. She smiled, a timid smile but full of light. Her fingers ran through his hair as if she were touching a piece of the past and, at the same time, a promise of the future. And what if I come back to the farm, she whispered, with you, with the baby, with a new story. Tobías nodded, deeply moved. Then we'll rebuild everything, brick by brick, laugh by laugh, with space for mistakes, for hard days, and for so much love. A silent tear rolled down her cheek, then another. But this time, they were tears of relief, of tenderness, of new beginnings. He embraced her gently, like someone holding something far too precious to ever lose again. Months later, the farm was full of life again. María had returned, now with a new purpose. She cared for the horses, the animals of the region, the projects, and the child she carried in her arms. Tobías worked beside her, between the soil and the important decisions. He was no longer the arrogant heir from before. He was a man who had learned to love with humility. On the porch at dusk, as the sky turned gold and the birds returned home, María rocked the baby gently against her chest. Tobías sat beside her, brushing his fingers over the baby's tiny feet. Do you think he'll look like me? I hope he has your eyes, she smiled. But my temper. Fair enough, he laughed, looking out over the fields. The world needs more people who are strong and sweet like you. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Silence, peace, love. And there, in that simple golden sunset, they knew with absolute certainty they were no longer victims of the past. They were survivors of time, builders of the present. And above all, a new family who, through stumbles, reunions and distances, had learned to choose love. Years passed, not as pages turning hastily, but as soft whispers written on the wind. The farm flourished. Maria became a renowned veterinarian, mentoring young professionals, building bridges between tradition and innovation. Her name became synonymous with care, resilience, and transformation. Tobías, now a respected voice in sustainable agriculture, used his influence not to grow an empire, but to cultivate values. He stood by Maria's side, never in front, never behind, always beside, and their child grew up among fields and folds, between muddy boots and bedtime stories under stars. A little boy with wide, curious eyes and a spirit full of questions. He didn't know the full story yet, but he lived in its continuation. One morning, as the sun rose over the golden pastures, Maria found an old box in the attic. Inside were the letters that never reached her, the ones that had once held silence between them. She took them to the porch, sat beside Tobías, and handed them to him. "We've already lived everything these words feared would be lost," she whispered. He held her hand, smiled at the past, and kissed her for the future, because sometimes true love doesn't come with fireworks or grand gestures. Sometimes it's a quiet place to return to, a voice that stays when everything else fades. A life built slowly, but with meaning. And for Maria and Tobías, love had become that place. Not perfect, but real and forever. Home. If this story touched your heart, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what moved you the most. And if you love stories about second chances, reconnections, and love that defies time, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Thank you for watching until the end. I'll see you in the next story.